It started like any other Sunday evening in Oakwood Estates, the kind of neighborhood where lawns are cut to regulation perfection, mailboxes match like military uniforms, and peace has an oddly corporate flavor. Everything was symmetrical, predictable, painfully HOA approved. Until, of course, the night one man's dinner turned into a full-blown rescue mission, complete with a helicopter, a heart attack, and a president with a clipboard more powerful than common sense. Jack Mitchell had moved back home to take care of his aging father. After 8 years flying medevac helicopters across the country, he thought settling into suburbia might offer some peace. But peace, as he quickly discovered, came with bylaws thicker than a phone book, and neighbors who whispered "good evening" the same way they might report a violation. Karen Williams, the HOA president, was Oakwood's self-appointed guardian of aesthetic purity, the kind of person who could turn a blade of grass into a federal case. She measured lawns with a ruler, carried her clipboard like a sword, and enforced Section 8, Paragraph 2 as if it were divine scripture. When Jack moved in, she smiled, but it was the kind of smile you give someone who's about to learn the hard way how the system works. At first, it was little things, a grass height violation here, a mailbox color issue there. Admiral blue, not navy, she'd insist, as if the fate of the neighborhood rested on pigment codes. To Jack, it was laughable, until the notices kept piling up. Within 2 months, he'd become the community's #1 outlaw for crimes like visible garden hose and premature Halloween decor. Still, Jack kept his cool. After all, how bad could one HOA president be? Then came the evening that changed everything. Jack's father was over for dinner, laughing over lasagna, when the laughter suddenly stopped. His hand went to his chest, his face drained of color. A silence fell so heavy it swallowed the ticking of the kitchen clock. Jack's instincts kicked in. Years of medical evacuations had trained him to act fast, faster than thought. He called 911, gave clear details, stayed calm. The operator assured him help was on the way. He believed it until he heard the siren stop. Not fade, stop. He glanced out the window, flashing lights at the neighborhood entrance and a lone silhouette standing in front of them with a clipboard in hand. Karen Williams. She wasn't letting the ambulance in. Because apparently, in Oakwood Estates, even death had to fill out a visitor form. But that was just the spark. Because what happened next, the call Jack made, the crowd that gathered, and the sight that dropped every jaw in the neighborhood would turn one man's front yard into the most chaotic airfield in HOA history.
At exactly 6:48 p.m., the flashing red lights of the ambulance hit the white bricked gates of Oakwood Estates and stopped cold. The paramedics inside couldn't believe it. There, standing firm like she was guarding the Pentagon, was Karen Williams. Clipboard in hand, pen cocked like a weapon, and a look on her face that could make an Amazon delivery driver turn around and apologize for existing. "Visitors must be signed in," she declared, her voice sharp and self-righteous. The paramedic blinked. "Ma'am, this is a 911 call. We have a medical emergency." "I understand," Karen said, in the tone of someone who very much did not understand. "But procedure is procedure. Even emergency vehicles need to be logged for community safety." Somewhere across the neighborhood, Jack's father lay gasping for air. The seconds dragged like years. Inside the ambulance, the paramedics' patience hit its limit. One of them leaned forward, gripping the steering wheel. "Lady, move your car or we're moving it for you." Karen didn't flinch. She pointed at her laminated HOA handbook like it was a court order. Section 5, Paragraph 3. Emergency vehicles require prior authorization. Prior authorization for an ambulance. Back at Jack's house, his phone buzzed. A text from his neighbor Jen. "Karen's blocking the ambulance at the gate." Jack stared for half a heartbeat, disbelief flickering into fury. Then, without thinking, he bolted. He told his neighbor Mike to stay with his dad and sprinted down the perfectly manicured streets, dodging mailboxes painted in HOA-approved shades of blue. He reached the entrance just in time to see Karen arguing with a paramedic whom looked seconds away from committing a crime of passion. "This is a medical emergency," Jack shouted, voice echoing off the stone walls. "Mr. Mitchell?" Karen said, turning calmly toward him. "I understand you're upset, but procedure is procedure. Even emergency vehicles need to be logged for community safety." "Yeah," Jack snapped, "so people can live to follow them." For a moment, nobody moved. The air was thick with the absurdity of it all. The flashing lights, the clipboard, and the man fighting for his life just a few streets away. Then, in one breath, Jack realized what had to happen. He reached for his phone. "Mike, it's Jack," he said, his voice steady now. "I need the chopper at my house. Dad's having a heart attack. The ambulance can't get in." There was a pause on the other end. "You're kidding." "I wish I was." "ETA? 10 minutes." "Make it 9. The paramedic stared at him, half in awe, half in disbelief. "You're calling a helicopter?" one of them asked. "Yeah," Jack said. "Since Karen here wants paperwork, I'll give her an air traffic report." Karen blinked. "You can't land a helicopter in a residential area. Watch me." The police arrived moments later, lights flashing. Karen practically sprinted toward them, ready to report Jack for attempted rule violation. "Officer," she began, "this man is trying to disrupt community security protocol." The officer barely glanced at her. "Ma'am, move your car or I'll move it myself." Karen's jaw dropped. "But the visitor registry? Now!" The sirens wailed again as the ambulance finally rolled through the gates, but the damage was done. A delay that could have cost a life, all because of one clipboard and a woman convinced she was defending suburban civilization from chaos. And if you think Karen learned her lesson after being scolded by the cops, oh no, because what came next wasn't just a rescue, it was a full-blown suburban air raid that turned Oakwood Estates into a scene straight out of Top Gun HOA edition. Would you like me to continue with Fact 3, the helicopter arrival, the neighborhood's reaction, and Karen's total meltdown?
By the time the first thump, thump, thump of rotor blades echoed across Oakwood Estates, the sun had barely dipped below the rooftops, painting the neighborhood in that soft, golden hour calm that was about to be shattered. Jack stood in his front yard, eyes fixed on the horizon. The ambulance had made it inside, but every second lost had cut deeper into his father's chances. The paramedics were inside working, but Jack had backup on the way. The kind with wings. Neighbors began to drift out of their pristine homes, drawn by the unmistakable sound slicing through the air. Curtains parted, phones lifted. The HOA-approved tranquility of Oakwood was about to get a noise complaint that even Karen couldn't file fast enough. Then it appeared. A white and red medvac chopper banking low over the cul-de-sac, blades tearing at the evening sky. The sight alone was enough to make every neighbor forget about lawn edges and mailboxes. They gawked, they filmed, someone even live-streamed. Jack moved with precision. He'd done this hundreds of times before. Mountaintops, highway accidents, rooftop rescues, but never his own front yard. He guided the pilot via phone, marking the landing zone with his porch lights and a hastily grabbed bedsheet, now serving as a makeshift signal flag. Karen, of course, was not amused. From down the block, her shriek could probably be heard over the rotors. "This is completely unauthorized. There are noise ordinances. You can't—" Her words dissolved into wind as the helicopter descended.
The downdraft hit like a hurricane. Karen's perfectly styled hair went full tornado. Her clipboard tried to take flight, slapping her across the face before disappearing into the night. The perfectly trimmed grass, the one Jack had once been fined for letting grow a quarter-inch too tall, flattened in a perfect circle under the force. Irony had officially landed. The medics worked fast. Jack's father was already stabilized enough for transfer. As they wheeled him out, Jack's crew chief, Rodriguez, jumped from the chopper, shouting over the roar, "Mitchell, what the hell kind of neighborhood is this?" Jack didn't miss a beat, the kind where helicopters are easier to deal with than the HOA. Karen was still screaming something about property values and bylaws, trying to wave down the police officer like she was signaling an aircraft of her own. "I'm issuing an emergency violation. Unauthorized aircraft, grass damage, noise pollution," she shouted, her words whipping away in the rotor wash. Rodriguez blinked at her, then turned to Jack. "Is she for real?" "Oh, she's real, and she's about to file that in triplicate." The chopper lifted off moments later, carrying Jack's father toward Memorial Hospital. Every neighbor stood watching, mouths open, hearts pounding, while Karen stood there in the chaos of her own making, clutching her now bent clipboard like a broken sword. For the first time in HOA history, silence fell, not because of her rules, but because everyone realized the rules had almost killed someone. But this wasn't the end, because while one life had just been saved, another battle was about to begin, a courtroom-style HOA showdown where Karen tried to fine a man for saving his father's life.
2 days after the helicopter landing, Jack's front lawn still bore a circular scar where the skids had pressed down, a bright green badge of rebellion against Oakwood's beige conformity. But to the HOA, that flattened grass was less a miracle sight and more a crime scene. By Tuesday morning, the whispers started. Neighbors who once feared Karen's wrath now traded stories like battlefield veterans. "Did you see her hair?" one giggled near the mailbox. "She looked like she'd fought a leaf blower." Another whispered, "I heard she tried to cite the paramedics." The suburban gossip network spread faster than fertilizer in spring. Jack, meanwhile, was at the hospital, sitting beside his father, who, against all odds, was alive and complaining about the food. "Next time," his dad muttered, "tell your HOA lady to season the soup." Jack laughed for the first time in days. But back home, Karen was drafting paperwork like she was preparing for a federal indictment. By Wednesday evening, the inevitable happened. An emergency HOA meeting. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The same woman who blocked an actual emergency was now hosting one of her own. Flyers went up overnight. Community meeting addressing recent violations and disturbances. Translation: Karen's revenge. The community hall was packed. Folding chairs, bad coffee, fluorescent lights. The whole suburban Senate vibe. At the center of it all sat Karen Williams, chin high, hair perfectly re-architected, her clipboard stacked with documents that could probably stop a bullet. "This emergency session of the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association is now in order," she began, voice syrup-sweet but trembling with fury. "We are here to address the egregious violations committed by resident Jack Mitchell, including but not limited to unauthorized aircraft landing, property damage, noise ordinance breach, and disruption of community harmony." A ripple of disbelief moved through the crowd. Colonel Bryant, the retired military man from across the street, muttered loud enough for everyone to hear, "Lady, that was tactical extraction, not community disruption." Laughter broke out. Karen banged her gavel like it was a threat. "Decorum," she barked. Jack stood slowly, the quiet confidence of a man who'd flown through storms far worse than this fluorescent circus. "You're really going to fine me for saving my father's life?" he asked, voice low but cutting through the room. Karen straightened. "Rules exist for a reason." "Yeah, and sometimes breaking them is the reason someone's still alive to hear that." Gasps, murmurs. One neighbor clapped, another joined. Soon the room swelled with applause. Karen's face tightened like drying paint. Then, in an unexpected twist, Davis, the HOA's retired lawyer, spoke up.
Actually, according to Section 17, Paragraph 9, attending members can override the board's decision by vote. Karen froze. That's not— I wrote that clause, Davis interrupted calmly. He raised his hand. All in favor of dismissing charges against Mr. Mitchell. Hands shot up like a wave, almost every single one. Karen's gavel cracked against the table. This is out of order! Yeah, so was blocking an ambulance. The motion passed in seconds. Karen's rulebook, once her weapon, had just turned on her. The crowd cheered. For the first time in Oakwood history, rebellion had a quorum. Karen sat motionless, her clipboard trembling slightly as realization sank in. Her authority, like that flattened patch of grass, would never fully recover. But if you thought Karen would surrender gracefully, think again. Because what came next wasn't humility, it was desperation. And desperate HOA presidents do what they always do best: double down on disaster.
The morning after the emergency meeting, Oakwood Estates didn't sound the same. No leaf blowers, no hedge trimmers, no shrill voice echoing through cul-de-sacs reminding residents that their trash cans were 2 inches too visible. Karen's voice, once the soundtrack of suburban submission, had vanished. And in its place came something entirely foreign to Oakwood: laughter. Neighbors who used to scurry indoors at the sound of her heels now lingered on their driveways. Mike and Jen let their golden retriever chase a tennis ball across 3 lawns without a single glance over their shoulders. Colonel Bryant, that old warrior, stood proudly next to his now unregulated hedges, sipping coffee like a man who'd finally won a war. And at the center of it all was Jack, the accidental folk hero of the cul-de-sac. He hadn't planned to become a legend. He'd planned dinner with his dad. But the story of the man who landed a helicopter on his front yard spread faster than HOA fines in a drought. The local news picked it up first. Pilot defies HOA to save father's life. Then the internet did what it does best: turned it into a meme. Clips of Karen's hair cyclone and the helicopter downdraft flooded social feeds. Someone even remixed it into a techno track called Rotor Rage, Karen's Mix. Jack's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Reporters, neighbors, even people from other states wanted to know if the tale was true. He just smiled and said, "Depends on what your HOA's like." Meanwhile, Karen was regrouping. Behind her drawn curtains, she drafted complaints, appeals, and letters filled with phrases like gross negligence of aesthetic duty. She even tried calling the county to report illegal aviation activity. But the dispatcher, who'd already read the viral story, simply replied, "Ma'am, maybe just say thank you, he didn't need to land it on you." Her power was crumbling. The board, newly chaired by Saudi, the kindergarten teacher Karen once fined for sidewalk chalk, was rewriting rules. Out went the color-coded mailboxes and the mandatory grass height checks. In came words like community, trust, and emergency exceptions. But Karen wasn't ready to vanish quietly. She printed flyers calling for her reinstatement, claiming she'd been the victim of mob justice. They appeared overnight on every doorstep until the morning sprinklers kicked in and soaked them all. Neighbors called it divine irrigation. Through it all, Jack stayed calm. He fixed the lawn, visited his dad, and politely ignored the drone of gossip. When asked how he felt about Karen's downfall, he just said, "Rules are fine until they start replacing humanity." It was the kind of line that stuck. It ended up on t-shirts, a local paper ran it as a headline, and somewhere in the background, Karen's clipboard collected dust, replaced by something the HOA had never officially approved: common sense. But peace in Oakwood never lasts long, because just when it seemed the neighborhood had learned its lesson, fate and a little poetic justice decided to deliver one last surprise.
For weeks, Oakwood Estates lived in something close to harmony, or at least the HOA version of it. Without Karen patrolling like a suburban traffic cop,
people started remembering that neighborhoods could actually feel like communities. The lawns grew a little freer, the laughter a little louder. The sky, still occasionally haunted by helicopter jokes, seemed brighter. But beneath that newfound calm, Karen was plotting her comeback. Every dethroned ruler thinks the empire will call them back eventually, and Karen was no different. She told herself the people missed structure, that deep down they craved her order. Her clipboard sat ready, her bylaws dog-eared, her ego freshly polished. Then came the ultimate blow, the for sale sign. It appeared one morning in front of Karen's immaculate regulation-approved home, planted there by her own hand. She told anyone who asked that she was moving to pursue new opportunities. Translation: the neighborhood that once bowed to her now avoided eye contact at the grocery store. Even her fellow rule keepers had defected. The colonel had invited the entire block to a weekend barbecue without HOA approval, and everyone came, everyone, except Karen. As the moving truck rumbled up, neighbors peeked through curtains trying to hide their smirks. Some waved, others offered polite goodbyes, a few might have popped champagne. But the real twist was, it wasn't who left, it was who moved in. 2 months later, a shiny new SUV pulled into Karen's old driveway. Out stepped a woman in aviator sunglasses and a leather jacket, the kind of confident stride that made people pause mid-lawnmower. She wasn't just anyone. She was Dr. Harper Chen, chief flight surgeon for the county's emergency medical service. The same hospital, in fact, where Jack had flown his father that night. And guess what? She was a pilot's wife. Jack was in his yard that morning when he saw the moving truck. His father, now healthy, cheerful, and defiant enough to hammer nails again, stood beside him. "You seeing what I'm seeing?" his dad asked. Jack nodded, grinning. "Another helicopter family. What are the odds?" 3-1, said a familiar voice. A new neighbor waved from across the street. Derek, a medevac pilot like Jack, who'd moved in recently. Oakwood Estates was slowly turning into the unofficial headquarters of airborne emergency medicine. Karen, wherever she was, probably felt the universe laughing, because her old fortress of bylaws and blue mailboxes was now home to 3 flight crews, the very people whose profession she'd tried to block from saving a life. And the irony didn't stop there. The new HOA president, Sadie, decided to mark the occasion by officially abolishing the outdated aesthetic compliance codes. In their place, she created Oakwood's first-ever community emergency readiness plan with a designated helicopter landing zone on Jack's lawn. The sign went up the following week. Official emergency landing site. Approved by HOA. Even the grass seemed to stand taller out of pride. Jack's dad laughed until tears rolled down his face. "You hear that, son? You broke the rules so good they made 'em permanent." But Oakwood's story didn't end with irony alone. Because what happened next, the moment Jack met his new neighbors and learned who they really were, turned this tale of HOA warfare into a legend of poetic, airborne symmetry.
6 months after the helicopter incident, Oakwood Estates didn't look much different, but it felt different. Gone were the clipboard patrols, the ruler-measured grass, and the whispers about mailbox shades. In their place came the sound of people actually talking, laughing, across property lines that no longer felt like borders. Jack stood in his yard one breezy Saturday morning, coffee in hand, watching his dad help Derek, the new guy across the street, unload boxes. The two of them were already arguing about grill techniques, both pretending they weren't sweating. "You're sure you're cleared for heavy lifting?" Jack called out. His dad smirked. "Doctor says I'm fine as long as I don't fly any helicopters." "Good thing you left that to me," Jack said. It was a strange, peaceful normal, one born out of chaos. Oakwood had changed, and not just in spirit. Under Sadie's leadership, the HOA had become human. Meetings no longer sounded like sentencing hearings. Fines were rare. Flexibility was in. There was even a neighborhood barbecue calendar, and the only mandatory rule was bring dessert. But the new era of Oakwood wasn't just about relaxed rules. It was about who moved in next. That day, as Derek's boxes disappeared into the house, a second moving truck pulled into Karen's former driveway. The neighbors gathered, curiosity buzzing louder than a hedge trimmer. Out stepped a woman with a confident stride and a hospital badge clipped to her jacket. Dr. Harper Chen, the county's chief flight surgeon, Derek's colleague, and now Oakwood's newest resident. Jack blinked. "You're kidding!" She laughed. "Not even close. Derek said this street had good airspace." "You realize you just moved into the former lair of the HOA's most feared tyrant." "Perfect," Harper replied. "I like to live dangerously." The neighborhood cheered her arrival like a parade. Colonel Bryant handed over a welcome basket that suspiciously looked like contraband barbecue ribs. Kids ran through sprinklers. Someone put up a banner that read, "Welcome home, no clipboard required." That night, as dusk settled, Jack, Derek, Harper, and the rest of the street gathered in Jack's yard, right where the helicopter had once landed. The grass was still marked by a faint circle, now a badge of pride. Harper knelt down, touched the soil, and smiled. "Hard to believe this used to be forbidden ground." "Now it's a backup landing site," Jack said. "Officially sanctioned by the HOA." Everyone laughed. Even the lawn lights seemed to twinkle a little brighter. From then on, Oakwood Estates became known by a new nickname, the Flight Path. Reporters occasionally dropped by to see the neighborhood that learned empathy from a helicopter. It was the kind of redemption story that made people think twice about their own little kingdoms of control. And somewhere downtown, in a high-rise condo with 0 lawns, Karen probably sipped her black coffee and flipped past every article that mentioned Oakwood's transformation. The HOA she once ruled had not only survived without her, it had soared. But even in peace, legends have a way of echoing, because when the past comes calling and Karen finally catches wind of how Oakwood rebuilt itself without her, the fallout delivers the sweetest closure yet.
It was a bright Saturday morning when a silver Lexus, the same model, same shine, same license plate, rolled back through the Oakwood Estates gates for the first time since the incident. Every neighbor recognized it instantly. The murmurs started before the car even parked. "Is that? No way. Oh, it's her. It's Karen." She'd been gone nearly a year, living in a downtown condo where, according to rumor, she'd managed to irritate her entire floor by reporting non-compliant balcony plants. But curiosity, or maybe guilt, had drawn her back. The gossip online, the viral videos, the local news coverage. Oakwood was famous now, but not for its perfect lawns. It was famous because it had learned to live again. Karen stepped out of her car with her signature crispness, posture straight, blazer immaculate, expression unreadable. Only one thing was missing: the clipboard. At first glance, Oakwood looked familiar. The same streets, same houses, but there was something unsettlingly different. Children played on the sidewalks in colorful chalk patterns that no one was erasing. Lawns were a little uneven but vibrant, filled with flowers of all colors. The air buzzed with music from an impromptu front porch jam session. A grill smoked lazily in Colonel Bryant's yard, and laughter echoed like freedom itself. Karen's eyes darted from lawn to lawn, searching for violations that didn't matter anymore. Then she spotted it, her old house. But the sight stopped her cold.
The once pristine property, her shrine of order, now had a gleaming brass plaque by the walkway. It read, "Official Emergency Landing Zone, Oakwood Estates, HOA approved." The words hit harder than a fine notice ever could. She stood there in silence as kids zipped by on bikes, one shouting, "Hey, that's the lady from the helicopter story!" Another yelled, "My mom said you tried to stop an ambulance!" The sound of their laughter trailed behind like a jet stream of karma. Jack spotted her from across the street. He didn't look angry, just calm. He walked over with that same steady pilot stride. "Afternoon, Karen," he said evenly. "Didn't think we'd see you back here." She tried for formality. "Mr. Mitchell, I was, passing through." He smiled politely. "You came just in time to see the new Oakwood. We finally have rules worth following." Her eyes flickered to the plaque again, then to the circle of grass still faintly visible on his lawn. "I see you've made, changes." "Yeah," Jack said. "Turns out, compassion doesn't need to be color-coded." Karen opened her mouth, searching for a retort, but nothing came. Not a rule, not a paragraph, not even a citation. The power she had once wielded had dissolved, leaving behind only the echo of what it cost her. Before she left, she noticed a mural painted on the community center wall, a simple image of a helicopter with the words, "When the rules failed, humanity landed." She stood there for a long moment, face unreadable, then got back in her car. For the first time, the queen of compliance drove away without checking her mirrors for violations. But Karen's exit wasn't the end. It was the closing act of a bigger story, because what came next turned Oakwood's chaos into a blueprint for every HOA in the state, and it all started with one unplanned landing.
By the time autumn rolled back around, Oakwood Estates had become something no one could have predicted. Famous. What began as a viral neighborhood scandal had turned into a statewide conversation about rules, power, and the absurd lengths some people go to preserve appearances. News outlets framed it like a suburban parable. The HOA that grounded compassion, when bureaucracy blocked an ambulance, and finally, the pilot who landed a helicopter and humanity back on his lawn. Jack never sought the spotlight. He wasn't out for revenge or glory. He'd done what any son and any human would do. But the story resonated because it was bigger than him. People everywhere recognized a bit of Oakwood in their own neighborhoods, offices, or cities. Those little empires of control where people mistake power for purpose. Meanwhile, Sadie, now the beloved HOA president, became something of a local celebrity herself. She was interviewed on morning shows, explaining Oakwood's compassionate HOA model. Instead of enforcing fines, the board organized volunteer days, community gardens, and safety programs. The bylaws had been rewritten from the ground up, literally, with one golden rule printed on page 1. Safety and empathy come before structure and appearance. Other communities noticed. Within months, 2 neighboring HOAs reached out for guidance, then 4, then 12. Soon, Oakwood's once infamous story had inspired an entire network of reform. Local officials even created a pilot program, pun absolutely intended, called the Oakwood Standard, designed to ensure that emergency services could never again be delayed by bureaucracy. Jack's name came up in every article, but he stayed grounded, figuratively and literally. He still worked medevac flights, still checked on his dad, and still mowed his grass, to whatever height he felt like. His yard's faint helicopter circle became a small neighborhood landmark. Tourists would drive by, take pictures, even drop letters thanking him for proving that empathy beats enforcement. One day, a TV crew asked him what he thought about becoming the face of HOA reform. He laughed. "I didn't set out to reform anything. I just wanted my dad to live." He paused, then added, "Maybe that's the problem.
somewhere along the way, we started making rules to protect lawns instead of people. The quote hit home. It was replayed, retweeted, and repeated so often that the Oakwood Community Center eventually engraved it on a bench beneath the mural of the helicopter. Karen's name, meanwhile, had become urban legend, shorthand for every overzealous rule keeper in suburbia. "Don't go full Karen," people would warn each other at HOA meetings across the state. Her downfall wasn't celebrated cruelly, it was remembered as a warning. Oakwood Estates had risen from the ashes of pettiness into a living example of balance, proof that structure and compassion could coexist if people remembered why they built communities in the first place. And yet, every story needs closure. Because long after the noise faded, one last encounter, quiet, unexpected, and surprisingly human, would bring the saga of Jack and Karen to its most powerful ending yet.
It happened quietly. No flashing lights, no rotors slicing the sky this time. Just a late autumn evening, a cool breeze drifting through Oakwood Estates, and a knock at Jack Mitchell's door. When he opened it, he didn't expect to see her. Karen Williams stood on his porch, hands clasped in front of her, posture smaller than he remembered. The crisp confidence that once radiated from her like a siren was gone, replaced by something humbler. Human. "Mr. Mitchell," she said softly, "I hope I'm not disturbing you." Jack blinked, momentarily speechless. "You're the last person I expected to see here." "I imagine so." She gave a tight smile. "May I come in for a moment?" Inside, the house was warm, the kind of warmth that comes not from temperature, but from peace, hard-earned. Karen glanced around, her eyes pausing on a framed photo. Jack and his father, both smiling beside a helicopter. A small brass plaque beneath it read, "For the day humanity beat the handbook." She swallowed. "I came to apologize." Jack leaned against the counter, crossing his arms, but saying nothing. "I've spent a lot of time thinking," she continued, voice faltering slightly. "When I saw that helicopter coming down, all I could think about was the noise, the damage, the rules. I told myself I was doing my job, but afterward," her voice cracked, "after seeing what happened, I realized I wasn't protecting the neighborhood, I was protecting my own sense of control." Silence filled the room. Not uncomfortable, just real. The kind of silence that holds truth in it. Jack finally spoke. "People make mistakes, Karen, but what matters is what they do next." She nodded, eyes glistening. "I know. That's why I came. I wanted to see what Oakwood became without me." She gave a faint, wistful laugh. "It's beautiful, imperfect, alive." He smiled. "That's the idea." They stepped outside together. The sun had nearly set, painting the cul-de-sac in soft orange. Kids played where once, years ago, they'd been shushed for sidewalk chalk. Across the street, Colonel Bryant was stringing lights that definitely weren't HOA approved. Karen took it all in. The laughter, the color, the freedom she'd once feared. "You did this," she said quietly. "No," he corrected. "We did. All I did was break a few rules to remind people what mattered." They stood for a moment in the fading light. Then Karen reached into her bag and pulled something out. Old, worn, slightly bent. Her clipboard. She looked at it, then at him. "You know, I used to think this meant authority. Now it just feels like a shield." He raised an eyebrow. "Planning to retire it?" She nodded. "I thought I'd leave it with the person who taught me what real leadership looks like." She handed it to him. He took it, not as a trophy,
but as a reminder, a symbol of a war won without hatred. As she turned to leave, Jack called out, "Hey, Karen!" She stopped. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you came back." She smiled, a real one this time. "So am I." Then she got in her car and drove away, her taillights fading into the dusk, leaving Oakwood quieter, but never the same. Jack stood there for a long time, watching the sky darken. Then he looked down at the clipboard in his hand, shook his head, and laughed. A familiar sound began to echo faintly in the distance, the rhythmic thump, thump, thump of rotor blades heading somewhere else, to someone else in need. Jack smiled. Not tonight. Tonight, everyone's safe. And with that, the man who once landed a helicopter on his own front lawn walked back inside, leaving behind a neighborhood and a legacy that would never again confuse rules for righteousness. Because sometimes you don't need permission to do the right thing. You just need the courage to land. If this story of HOA madness, redemption, and rotorblade justice hit you right in the property values, smash that like button for more real-life HOA warfare stories that prove sometimes the best way to fix the rules is to break them. Subscribe to HOA War for the next battle between common sense and the suburban constitution, because here, every lawn hides a story.